Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Shaun Solo. And today, I want to talk about The Witcher 3, The Wild Hunt, or Wild Hunt, The Witcher Wild Hunt, whichever you want to call it. However they've decided to brand it, it is the third game in the series. In the interest of full disclosure, I have not yet finished this game, but I have put about 50 hours into it. That's why this is more like thoughts. It's not a review. There's nothing concrete. Like, my opinion could change. But like I said, I put 50 hours in. I think that's enough to at least have an opinion, an informed opinion about the game. And also, at the end of it, I would like to kind of address some of the controversies, or manufactured controversies, however you'd like to think about it, about just the things surrounding the game in terms of its race relations and misogyny and sexism and all sorts of hyperbolic things that people like to throw around and without any or feeling that they don't should be held up to scrutiny. But anyways, let's talk about the game itself. Yeah, so The Witcher 3. I'm really loving it. 50 hours in, and I still haven't beaten it, so which is a testament to the breadth of the world and the things you're able to do. It's really impressive in those terms, right? Like, even like the traversal, like there's always just like the world, the way it's designed, and like the forests and the mountain peaks and all this other wonderful things you can do. It's the most immersive, I think, like open world that I've been in since probably Skyrim. Skyrim's the last time I remember like getting really lost in a game like this, because like, you know, a lot of times I'll just go on foot to my next places regardless of how far they are, if applicable anyways. I don't really fast travel very often unless I'm in the middle of a mission and I'm in a rush. But like if I'm going to newer areas or whatever, like a lot of times I'll just go on foot because I just really enjoy exploring and exploring like kind of the edges of the world. Because that's the thing about this, like it feels organic. It feels like there's just boundless possibilities for discovery. And you know, like there's so many things, like just the things you can find out in the woods and stuff like that, like abandoned houses and like the kind of monsters that appear. It's like almost like these tertiary elements of the game that don't affect everybody's everyday life all the time, but like there are monsters hiding in the darkness, hiding in the woods, in the shadows, and the deeper you go, the more you find, and you know, it's crazy. Like, so I'm just kind of running around and doing side quests, and every once in a while I pop over and I'll do an actual story quest. The thing about the side quests though is these things are expansive. I mean, Christ, you can't like pop in and be like, oh, I'm gonna play for 20 minutes, and you know I'm gonna do a side quest or whatever. I mean, I'm not including like the question marks that are on the map that you can go discover, because those are usually like small incidental things like, you know, treasure troves and things like that. Sometimes they do broaden into a bigger quest line, but they're so in depth. Like there's so much stuff to them. I mean, and they just keep stacking. I mean, like most side quests, most of them take at least a couple hours, which is something that's like really interesting. Kind of like that, the same way in kind of Skyrim, the things that you'll stumble upon, and then you'd end up like kind of on like this couple-hour journey of going through castles and stuff like that. Well, granted, you don't get to do that a lot in Witcher. It's mostly just in the open world itself, and you're not going into castles and stuff like that. But it just made me feel kind of the same way that I did. And even like all the incidental characters, like these side quest characters and stuff like that, they have a real like feeling of like personhood. Like they feel like they're well developed, and there's a lot of care in their characterization and the things they do and the way they approach the world and stuff like that. And also just like how your interactions will affect everything else. Like there's a persistence of the world, so when you do something, it affects another corner of the world, even if that's just like characters and stuff like that. Like I have this mission where I went through and killed a bunch of witch hunters instead of kind of going along with a ruse that I had planned out with another character. Ended up just like slaughtering them all because I couldn't stand them, right? That's just the Witcher that I'm playing is kind of more morally upright, and he has kind of a strong sense of justice. So I went and killed them all, but then after that, like all of the other witch hunters and whatnot, and these agents of this guy that I ended up killing, they'll like openly attack me when I go to towns and stuff like that. So like that's kind of neat to me. And also just kind of incidental things like conversation trees that kind of branch off in ways that you don't expect. And it ends up affecting the game, because the game is it has like a morality system, kind of. It's more gray than like, say, like a BioWare game. It's not your standard like good answer, bad answer, or or like medium, positive, aggressive. Like, it doesn't do that. It's not like pointing you in a direction when you're making decisions about like how to respond to people. So it's much more organic, and you don't really know up front how those ripples are going to affect the rest of the game and the rest of the story and stuff like that. So I'm really excited to, like, I'm actually probably, because I'm 50 hours in, I've done a lot of upgrading, I've done a lot of side quests and stuff. I might probably gonna start mainlining the main quests, like, just because I want to see the rest of the story, because it is a good story. Like, there's a lot of layers to it, a lot of nuance, a lot of subtlety, and I think people are kind of being a little harsh on it, honestly. Few things though, like a negative perspective, is the inventory system. Now, the first time, my first 20 hours or so of the game, didn't have a problem with it. And you can upgrade your inventory system by buying like kind of attachments for your steed, for your horse Roach. You can buy like bigger saddlebags and stuff like that, which helps a great deal. But just because there's so much stuff to pick up, like, it's really easy to fill up your inventory system, and then you're forced to decide if you want to just drop stuff, or do you want to find a merchant that you can sell them to. But then if you find a merchant, then he might only have 300 coin or something like that, so you're not going to be able to sell all your higher end items to him, so you're going to have to find another merchant. It's kind of like very similar to Skyrim in that respect, and that, honestly, I would not mind if they just kind of gamified it. Like, if I can believe that Geralt can, or Geralt, however you want to pronounce it, can fit 60 things in his pocket, I'm pretty sure I'm okay if he can fit 500 things in his pocket. Like, it doesn't break immersion. It doesn't really add much to the game, honestly, as other than like making some busy work. It can just be kind of aggravating at some point, because you are going to pick up a lot of stuff, and you're going to pick up a lot of things for your alchemy, and when you're mixing potions and stuff like that. That's a big part of the game, especially on higher difficulties. You're really going to have to like think about that stuff more thoughtfully in terms of what potions you use for certain situations and the effects that they have on your weapons. It's that's cool. Like, I really like the alchemy system. I think there's a lot of interesting depth to it there that I don't think a lot of people are probably going to get that deep into unless you're playing, like I said, on higher difficulties. If you're playing on normal or easy, you don't really need to do it too much, honestly. It's going to give you a more of an edge, no pun intended, to your swords, but it's not entirely necessary. At least it doesn't feel that way. Then you have the stuff with the signs. I think it works really well. I think the stamina system is fair. Like your recharge on spells and stuff like that, you can't just spell spam. So you have to, even on the lower end, of difficulty, you have to like kind of at least be a little thoughtful. You're gonna have to kind of get into some kind of strategy about how you approach certain different enemy types. And that's another thing, actually, as a negative a little bit. The combat system is not amazing. Like, it's very serviceable. I think it's fair once you spend enough time with it. Like, but up front, like, it's gonna cause you some difficulty, because what they do is kind of like in the way when they patched Witcher 2, they had like kind of this tutorial area. They kind of just give you all of it up front in one thing. So it's not like organically built into the beginning hours of the game where it's kind of introducing these new concepts. It's like, no, here's all the battle mechanics. We hope you remember them. Have fun. That's very antiquated, in the same way that the inventory system is a little antiquated in terms of just design. But, like, you can muscle through it. It's a lot more forgiving than the other Witcher games, especially like Witcher 2. Way more forgiving. Even just the idea that Geralt pulls out like the right kind of sword, because you have your steel swords, you have your silver swords for monsters, steel swords for men, and wolves and bears and all that stuff. He'll automatically pull out the right sword, which is just something that it's just streamlined. People could say, well, that's a concession to modern gamers, and it probably is a little bit. Like, I think they wanted to reach a broader audience with this game, and it seems like they're being pretty successful. It's sold very well. It's been reviewed very well. But yeah, some of that streamlining, I don't think that's, I don't know, people kind of look at it as kind of a negative, like kind of your old and hard and true like RPG fans, because RPG fans and old school gamers are a finicky fucking bunch, and they do not like change a lot of times. And it's something I've talked about over the years here and there on this channel. It's just like, it's okay to iterate. It's okay. Like some of these design decisions are antiquated, and they don't really need to be in modern games. Like you have to think about like what purpose does it really serve? Like going back to the inventory system, like what purpose does it really serve to limit you in that way? I suppose you can make the argument that it makes it so you're not overwhelmed by the amount of things you have at times, but I don't know. But then you go to the whole thing with the vendors and the merchants and stuff, and they're limited money, like just like in Skyrim. I remember in Skyrim that being so fucking annoying, because I'd have to go if I was encumbered and I would have to go to like fast travel to 3 different towns to go talk to merchants, hoping they would have enough money to buy this shit, because some of it was worth money. Because if you're just out there in the world collecting things, even if they are the things that are on the higher end of value, you're going to hold on to them, and you might not find yourself back at a town for a while because you're just out adventuring. And I think it kind of just puts the brakes on the game sometimes in a way that I feel is negative. And it forces you to kind of just get into like this kind of just time wasting mechanic. And that's probably the biggest flaw I see in the game. Like that's what bothers me the most. It is a little buggy, as these games tend to be, but not in a game-breaking way. I've only had 1 or 2 instances where I had to restart the game. Like, there was like a quest line where I had to go to a brothel, and the head of the brothel was supposed to lead me into a room full of people that I was supposed to have a secret meeting with. And she just didn't move. She just didn't go anywhere. She just stood there. So what I had to... I was like, I thought, like, I was like, oh, I guess I'm doing something wrong, or maybe I'm just supposed to go to this place or whatever. But no, so I got frustrated. What I did is, so I restarted the game. I was like, I bet there's something that she's supposed to do something. And lo and behold, I restarted the game, went back. Yes, she leads me to a place that enables the game to continue, or the mission to continue, rather. Because the game continued. I could still run around and do whatever. She just wasn't budging. Being stubborn that day, I guess. But yeah, like overall, it's a really fantastic game. Like it's really got its hooks into me. It's definitely going to be my game of the summer for the most part. Other than reacquainting myself with Metal Gear Solid franchise. But this is kind of gonna be my big time waster. The thing I put a lot of time and investment into. And I'm the kind of person, like, if I don't enjoy this world, I don't enjoy these characters, I don't enjoy the exploration, then I kind of check out eventually. Like that's what happened with Dragon Age Inquisition. Like I just got really bored. It just felt incredibly tedious, and I have not felt that way about Witcher 3. Not yet, but I spent about equal amounts of time, about 50 hours a piece. Dragon Age Inquisition a little bit more. Because I like doing side stuff, I like to explore, but for some reason Dragon Age Inquisition just wore out its welcome a lot faster, because I found just everything to be very similar. I felt like it was just padding, the game was just padded to hell with like their side quests were just the same quests over and over and over again. And no matter what area you went into, like it all felt very samey. And I just kind of got bored. And that's just a words. That's a personal preference thing. Like I said, but the Witcher, I think it's kept my attention with mission variety and stuff like that, and the depth of the missions. Like I don't feel like I'm just on constant fetch quests. I feel like there's more to it, even though ultimately they probably are mostly fetch quests. Like I think like the story strands that are there like kind of keep you invested in a different way, that elevates it beyond like a simple standard kind of open world RPGs fetch quest stuff. So it kind of makes you feel better about it, I guess. You don't feel, it doesn't feel so samey. They feel like they're unique and they are different from each other. So I appreciate that a lot. Like, it's a really great game. I think it's worth every penny. And, like, CD Projekt Red is an awesome fucking studio. Like, and if you get this game, if you get a box copy of the game, even if you get digital copies, actually, but you get a ton of extra shit. Like, it came with like this little mini lore guide. It came with a map. It came with a full soundtrack to the game on CD. Like, that's just cool. It's like, and also a thank you note. Crazy. But that's a cool thing. Like, it's a cool little thank you guys. Like, thanks for supporting our game. Blah blah blah. Because they have the most, like I said, the most consumer friendly like policies of any studio, and even their whole thing with the DLC. Like they're offering a bunch of DLC that usually most I think game companies would charge you, like a buck a piece or so, buck or $2 a piece, because it's incidental stuff. It's like like beard styling and alternate outfits and some weapon sets and armor sets that you can go find in the game. Even there's even some missions, some story, some extra like side quests or mission stuff that they threw in there. Like a lot of people would charge you, maybe not a ton, but at least a little bit. And the only thing they're charging for what they're calling expansion sets, which kind of harkens back to older PC gaming era, where expansions were a pretty normal thing for, especially for games of this ilk, right? Like of the RPG sets, and even like first-person shooter sets. Like, if you remember all the expansions that came out for the original Half-Life. I mean, I'm not just talking about like Team Fortress or even Counter Strike. I mean, like what was it, like Project Blue or whatever, the Blue missions and like all these other different things that they kind of offered, and they've promised like if you get the expansion sets, there's going to be 2 of them, and like they're big, they're substantial, they're like actually 20 to 30 hours worth of like game content. They're not just kind of these throwaway little mini mission DLC things like that you often find in games like this. So it's just BioWare was guilty of it like a lot, especially when thinking about like their Mass Effect stuff. When they were releasing DLC for Mass Effect 3 for that year after release, and like most of the missions, yeah, they're cool and stuff. A lot of them actually felt like they should have been just naturally, organically part of the game. I'm talking about the Prothean thing, that Day 1 DLC bullshit that was actually incredibly relevant to the main storyline. And their other stuff, like oh god, now I'm blanking on the name of it. Leviathan. The Leviathan mission also felt like pretty important to that story making more sense. It would actually kind of made the ending feel a little bit more logical than it was without that stuff. So it's cool to see CD Projekt Red just be, I guess, I don't know, like I said, more consumer friendly. I think that's really, really the crux of it. It is worth every penny. I'm having a ton of fun. I love, I play it probably, for an hour or so every day. Just pop in. I end up doing half a quest because of how long they are. But it's a really neat game. I think everybody should try it out if you haven't already, which you probably already have because it's a pretty popular game. But moving on. Speaking of consumers and things like that. So there's been a few articles. One of the first reviews that came out for the game by Polygon. Actually, can't remember the name of the writer. But he's a writer on there. Oh, here it is. Found it. What's the writer's name? Arthur Gies, I believe. Yes. Arthur Gies! He wrote a review for the game that mostly was mostly fair, but he does say some, I guess, hyperbolic or incendiary things, kind of accusing the game of being racist and inferring that the developers may be a little bit sexist and misogynistic. Because that's this thing about The Witcher and this universe, it has some historical precedence, right? Like, it does take place in the days of yore. But it is also a fantasy at the same time. But the world rules and what goes on, like, there is some realistic representations of the way people lived. So you're going to come across some sexism and some misogyny and stuff like that. But I think that what people confuse that with is that just because the world you're in is sexist does not mean that your characters are, does not mean, or your main characters, but doesn't mean that's the story you're telling. But you're still dealing with like kind of this real world thing. I've even heard some criticisms about like the character Ciri, and like here's some like really empowered woman, this female Witcher-esque person. And whenever you get control of her, all the NPCs yell horrible insults and call her a cunt and a slut and a whore and a bitch and all this stuff as you're running away and as you're fighting them. And I don't understand like how any reasonable person can like take that and think that like, oh, well, that's what the game developers are saying. That's the way the game developers feel about this character. I think that's ridiculous because she is an incredibly empowered character. I mean, like the amount of women, like empowered women that are in this game is fucking crazy. So like it's just one of these things that you can't ever please anybody. That's what it feels like at the end of the day. It feels like no matter what, people go into these like look at these games, it's like from such a narrow, myopic view that they're just there. They're going to find something wrong with it, regardless. And even when you do try, like it's considered tokenism, or it's not enough, or it's, which I just don't understand, because this game is, it's obviously, it's a very adult game. It's meant for adults. I think it's really thoughtful. Like I said, every quest line, every character has like a life to it, in a way that's almost unprecedented. And I feel like it's a real step forward for this genre, for video games in general. And it's not given like that kind of respect or credit. It's just going to be nitpicked to death about, you know, what NPCs, how NPCs act. It's fucking ridiculous. And then to further on to that, like, just because like it was a hot topic, so people were talking about it. Other people, also from Polygon, I believe, I'm probably going to butcher this guy's name, is Tariq Musa. Tariq Musa, this is an opinion piece, which is, let me just talk about that for a second. Opinion pieces, right? The op-ed world. It's okay to have your own opinion. I'm totally okay with people writing kind of like their feelings and their subjective feelings about video games. I've talked about this a little bit in the most recent weeks. But like, I'm okay with that. Like, I appreciate that stuff. I read that stuff. That's kind of how I write. I write from a very subjective perspective a lot of times. I mean, I'll always acknowledge nuts and bolts and always acknowledge mechanics, and I write a lot about movies, so I mostly focus on that, but I think I'm fair to movies, and I also think when I make a claim, I try to do my best to back it up, right? But I would never go so far as what these writers, these kind of, like, and I hate to use the term because I think it's overused, but they're very clickbaity. It feels very like, just, let's just, like, write another article for the hell of it, like, I guess. Like, they're not telling you anything, like, profound or deep or anything like that. I mean, so Witcher 3 is being attacked for not having any people of color, POCs, which is just this really, I think, like, condescending, like, pandering, new, like, politically correct term. But yeah, there's no people of color in the game. And other people have come to his defense saying, like, well, this is a Polish developer. They're telling a Polish story. And, you know, not every game has to reflect modern society. And the thing that I think a lot of people miss out on is that it's not even about reflection of modern society or international or worldwide views of things. It's like they're exclusively looking at it from a very Western perspective. And they're completely focused on skin tone. Like, it's really weird. I think it's a really weird, like, thing to hang your hat on. Because just because you're white doesn't mean you're not a different, like, ethnicity, I guess. It doesn't mean you're not, like, you know, this whole idea that just, like, every white person is the same across the globe, I think is a little disgusting. It's a little weird. And they're telling a Polish story, and like, and the people get into like these semantic debates about the time and history that it's supposed to take place, and then being like, well, it's a fantasy world, so it doesn't fucking matter, so they could have black people there, it doesn't matter. And, you know, and they're only going after this game in that kind of, like, aggressive way because it's very popular. If it wasn't, and nobody gave a shit about it, then nobody would talk about it in that way. I mean, nobody talks about, like, kind of these indie games that kind of have the same problem, and maybe even more so of a problem because they are very from a Western perspective. Something like Gone Home, I would say, is a game that you could throw stones at that if you really want. It's like, well, why are they like this middle class white family? That doesn't reflect anything about the struggles of people, and this could have been a real powerful statement on top of it being about spoiler alert. On top of it being a story about, like, a lesbian young girl, like, coming into herself. It could have been a story about a black lesbian girl, or an Asian, or a Filipino, or a Mexican, like, and people just, like, so, like, the criticism just kind of rings false, and it feels very just opportunistic in kind of a gross way. Like, and it's not that they have this opinion. Like, it's not the opinion that bothers me. Everybody has a right to that. I do think, but they use, like, the op-ed, like, classification as, like, as a shield to not be criticized for it. Like, I think just because you have an opinion doesn't mean that people shouldn't be able to criticize it. Doesn't mean people shouldn't be able to question it. Like, the veracity of your opinion should be held up to some sort of scrutiny, especially if you're talking about you're writing articles for like the biggest games media outlets on the internet. Unfortunately, and there's just no personal responsibility there. I mean, they have these long, ponderous dissertations about the nature of games and how most gamers are racist, and especially this Tariq Musa guy who's talking about Rust, and like how at one point Rust was like just randomizing skin color for your character. So you as the player weren't going in and designing your own character. And their philosophy at the time was like, well, it doesn't really matter, and you can't see your character anyways, but other people can see you, and blah 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 blah. And there's probably a very small minority of people that had a problem with it. Like, he quotes one person. So what is he writing on Steam? Another user said, "I was going to buy Rust today, but I am a white guy and don't want to take the chance of playing a black character." Another said this was forced politics. Which it does. It does politicize something, because like if you were just it is a survival game where you're supposed to I think you should be able to just kind of make the character whatever you want to make it, and like it is kind of a forced political statement. Like, I mean, because there's an algorithm to balance out the amount of black people and white people, because then if it's ever skewed one way or the other, then people would just complain about that. So you should just leave it up to the players, especially in a situation like that. It's not linear, it's not narratively driven. So you should be able to design your own characters. That just seems like common sense. But the people behind Rust, they wanted to, Gary Newman, they wanted to at least try it, maybe like, and it was like, I think it was like a kind of vague political statement, because it doesn't really matter, right? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But that's also, like, if these games are about, like, personal experience and empowerment, then you should have control over that. Like I said, it's not a linear, narratively driven game. I mean, like, if you want to talk about, like, that space, right? Like, yes, you're right. There are a lot of, like, straight white male protagonists in video games. And though I think the industry could use a little bit of variety. Like, I want to play different games with different walks of life and people from different perspectives and all that good stuff. Like, I fully embrace that, but I just have a problem with, like, it being, like, kind of the status quo, new status quo, like, mandate that we are forcing game developers to make games that, in my opinion, just lead to pandering, and then it leads to tokenism. So then you're just gonna have another problem on your hands. Like, you're never gonna be able to please anybody. So I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for the progress that has been made. And I think, like, this intense focus over the last couple of years on like quote unquote feminism in games and the female perspective and how much variety there are in people's skin tone, because that's really what they're talking about. They're not talking about different races. They're just arbitrarily talking about, like, well, there's not enough brown people in games, and that doesn't reflect my, like, worldview, and blah blah blah. And it's just like, okay, I mean, that's fine. That's a fair thing. But when you take it a step further to say that, like, people like and CD Projekt Red maybe has some, like, deep-seated, like, racism or, like, sexist and misogynist and sexist, like, somewhere deep inside themselves, I think you're taking it too far. And especially just because you're writing an op-ed doesn't mean you can't, like, contact the developer for a quote or have them, like, defend themselves. So, but I think CD Projekt Red has been kind of like, oh, fuck it, like, I don't really care what these people say. We're just gonna do what we're gonna do, and whatever. Like, because they don't feel like it's a valid criticism. I think, like, if it was a valid criticism, they would address it in patches and stuff like that. I mean, it's just gotten to these, like, ridiculous places, where gaming is just, like, being involved in, like, even, like, as a hobby, like, reading articles and stuff like that has become so, like, hostile and caustic on either ends of the spectrum. On both ends of the spectrum, people that are, like, into this stuff, people that are against this stuff, it's almost like cartoon levels of just vitriol and ridiculousness. Because the truth is always in the middle, folks. There's never any, like, especially when you kind of take these extreme stances and calling people misogynists, and, like, it's gotten to the point that those words, like, no longer hold any real meaning. They've been stripped of their power and significance because of the way they're used. And they don't even mean the same thing that they used to anymore. And that's unfortunate. Like, there's a shift in language that's going on that's ridiculous. And I as an adult person, like, I can't take it seriously anymore when you hear that stuff. There was a time where, like, if you called somebody misogynist or racist or sexist, it was a big fucking deal. But now, those terms are just kind of thrown around, like, just because, like, of maybe, like, a misunderstanding or, like, just being too aware, I guess. I don't know what you want to call it. Too politically correct, in your personal views. And, it's a funny thing. A lot of the people that criticize this kind of stuff are fucking straight white people. Straight white men. A lot of times. Not always. But I'd say good, like, 70% of the time. Most of these these gaming outlets, these news outlets or whatever, are staffed by white men. Like, so there's a element of hypocrisy there. There's just something, like, a little silly about it. Yeah, sure, I'm sure they have some POCs, some people of color. Yeah, most of them are freelance and they just write, like, an article here and there for them, but they're not part of their staff. So, something to consider, I suppose. Because I think, like, when people are going to write opinions and stuff like that, you should consider their background, where they're coming from, where they work for, because all that stuff works in congruence to influence their views. And tells you something about the people they are. Especially if you go to Twitter, which is just the worst goddamn place ever. Just the shit people say to each other. Including, like, the professionals, quote-unquote. Scare quote. Professionals. Like, the things they say to people is just so ridiculous, and they feel like they have a right to say it. Which they do have a right to say it, but that doesn't make it any better. It doesn't make it seem like they're any more professional or legitimate. And then you just end up getting lost in the sea of vitriol. Of the sea of bullshit. And then you become just as illegitimate as the people you criticize for criticizing you. But anyways, I mean, that's my 2 cents on, like, all the manufactured controversy. Because I think it's completely manufactured. I think it's completely bullshit. I think it lacks subtlety. It's incredibly reductive. And I think you take something that could potentially be an interesting, serious discussion and you turn it into clickbait. You turn it into BuzzFeed. And that's unfortunate. But that is, unfortunately, I mean, that's the way the world is. I mean, you go to any kind of media nowadays, it's incredibly, like, biased to one side or the other. It's very hard to find people that are middle ground people, or neutral. It's almost impossible. Because people don't want to hear that. People just want to hear their opinions and their preconceptions reinforced by somebody else because they feel like it validates them. Because, like, oh, well, I'm smart and I think this way, and look how this person's smart and they think that way, so I must be even smarter. Like, it's an unfortunate, just part of human nature, really, that the constant search for validation. But, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do, really? It sucks because it's just sucking the fun out of everything. Everything is controversial. You can't even have an episode of Game of Thrones on without people just getting up in arms. But, when people get up in arms, is completely reactionary. That's something I've noticed as well. Like, it's people's, like, knee-jerk reactions suddenly become their deep-seated beliefs. Deep-seated, like, opinions, without really thinking about what the fuck they're talking about, or adding the proper context to things, or, giving any room for subtlety and nuance, and especially when it comes to storytelling, especially when it comes to games. And that's unfortunate. I think this mandate that, like, everything has to be, I don't know, representative of the entire world. And when I say entire world, I mean the Western civilization, because that's really what we're talking about. They, let's be honest here. Let's be real. People that live in the Western world often are going to have a Western perspective. That's how we're going to think about things. I'm no different. I'm trying to be a little bit more mindful, and especially when it comes to something like this. And, I mean, it's a really difficult subject to talk about just because of how hostile people get about it. You can't really have a discussion about this stuff because it's always just going to be turned into some kind of... Because what if you're wrong about something, or what if your preconceptions are wrong? So if you voice that, you're just going to invalidate yourself forever as far as these people are concerned. A 140 character tweet can ruin your legitimacy as a free-thinking adult. It's ridiculous. It's gross. It's ridiculous. But The Witcher 3 is awesome. So I think you guys should play that. You should play it if you have. If you're on the fence, especially like Steam summer sales are coming up. If you have a PC that can run it, because it's got kind of steep requirements. I would definitely recommend picking it up, but I'm sure it'll be the console side of it will be having sales at some point soon, especially with the holiday season. If you gotta wait till then, hey, it's worth it. I'd say it's worth it at the $60 price point. I still think it would be worth picking up in that respect, but it's for people that really enjoy like open world RPGs, Skyrim, Dragon Age Inquisition. It's got like it's combat focused, kind of in the same way that Dragon Age Inquisition is. So if you enjoyed that, I would definitely check this out. I think it's a lot deeper and a lot more thoughtful than either of those games. I think the storyline is actually way better, in my opinion. But yeah, so that's my thoughts on The Witcher 3 and the surrounding manufactured controversy. And that's going to about do it for me right now. I'm Shaun, and I will talk to you guys next time I got something to talk about.